Hello YouTubers, this is Gold Standards User 924 coming at you with another video. I'm going to be continuing with my Morphin Power Rangers reviews, and last I picked up, I finished with Season 1, so with that aside, we'll jump straight into Season 2. So Power Rangers Season 2 opens up with a maniacal creature by the name of Lord Zedd, and he invades the Moon Palace, which was home to Rita and her minions. And Zedd and Rita have like this little confrontation, and this sort of leads to a moment where Zedd seals Rita back inside the dumpster, and Goldar eventually betrays Rita along the way. So Lord Zedd ships Rita to outer space. She's still stuck in that, sealed in that dumpster, and where she's basically not going to appear for pretty much half of season 2. So, Rita gets kicked out of her own palace, and as a result, Lord Zedd takes over Rita's throne and becomes the new ruler of the Moon Palace, at least for the time being. And so, so Lord Zedd, to kind of be like this inauguration, Lord Zedd creates this monster by the name of Piranha's Head, whose ability was to freeze any objects that stood in its path. And what happens is that Piranha's Head, a notable moment has the Piranha's Head freezing the Dino Megazords, which was the Megazord that the Power Rangers used. Whenever there was like a giant monster fighting, how Power Rangers had to summon their Megazords. So their Megazords are inaccessible to use, and and since they're frozen solid, the Power Rangers, as a result, resorts to Zordon, and in the command center, Zordon, tells the Rangers that they're going to have an upgrade for the new Megazord that they'll have, and it turns out to be these group of mythological beasts, and Power Rangers Season 2 was taking its footage from the Super Sentai series entitled Die Ranger, and which that series emphasized on the classic mythological beast, consisting of the dragon, the griffin, the lion, the unicorn, and the phoenix, or the firebird as it was called in the series. And so basically, the Power Rangers, get these upgrades. So the Dino Megazords aren't necessarily destroyed in a way, but they're just kind of, like I said, very, they're upgraded into a much powerful form. So with Jason, he had the power of the dragon, Zack had the lion, Trini had the griffin, Billy had the unicorn, and Kimberly had the firebird. So those Zords combine and they become the Thunder Megazord. And when you have Tommy, who's still sticking around as the Green Ranger. Unlike the other 5 Power Rangers, Tommy does not get a new Zord, so he's pretty much stuck with Dragon Zord. So they were continuing to burn out the episodes, the remaining episodes from the Zoo Ranger 2 footage. And, and basically what that had to do was kind of combine the Zoo Ranger and the Die Ranger Megazord fights simultaneously and kind of mesh them together. And, with the Super Sentai footage, I mean, in the earlier Power Ranger seasons, it's very obvious that you could tell that there's a footage being used from another TV show. You could judge by like the grainy, crisp quality, picture quality of a certain fight scene, and you compare that to any of the other Power Ranger scenes where like maybe the Power Rangers are in their civilian form, or they're shooting footage at the youth center or something. You can really tell, but the quality is vastly different from when you see like the Super Sentai footage. And Sentai footage is normally used during Megazord fights and basically more fight scenes, but that's like basically in later seasons. But Mighty Morphin, they were utilizing unmorphed fight scenes a lot more, with the American footage. So I mean the Sentai footage, hasn't really aged well. Basically, what I'm trying to say, but it's just kind of just the indication of that Power Rangers is actually taking footage from a Japanese TV show. So that's one of the few indications at that. So eventually, eventually, though the Piranha's head gets destroyed by the Thunder Megazord, and the Power Rangers, triumph over Lord Zedd's inaugural debut, since his first plan of attack backfires. So that's basically what the mutiny mainly was. And the thing with the mutiny was that when the mutiny was originally aired, it premiered on a special primetime block on Fox, and it was really a rarity at the time. Some sort of a special treat in a way, because Fox Kids would normally air on weekday afternoons and or Saturday mornings, and this was such a rarity at the time to see Power Rangers being aired during the evening hours. And it wasn't until when Disney bought the rights to air the Power Rangers that they would start airing their new episodes on their on the primetime block, Toon Disney, and we all now know as Disney XD. So eventually, it was, like I said, just a really unique treat at the time, and and the mutiny was just that really enjoyable episode. So still a very strong opener. And then you have a couple one-off episodes in between, or at least after the mutiny, and and also along those subplots, they kind of emphasize on Tommy and his Green Ranger powers possibly depleting for good. And Lord Zedd starts to have this big obsession with stripping Tommy away from his Dragon Coin powers. And there was like one moment where Tommy was caught under this spell, and he wanted to kind of weaken the Dragon Coin. So I mean, there were some numerous attempts for Lord Zedd to strip Tommy away from his Green Ranger powers. And this kind of eventually culminates in this two-part miniseries entitled Green No More. And in that episode, Tommy gets this transmission from his future self, and that the power, that his Green Ranger powers are going to be depleted for good. And fortunately, that turns out to be the case. And also along the way, you have Lord Zedd kidnapping these 5 random civilians. And they're caught in this trance, and as a result, they were Lord Zedd recruited those 5 random civilians to become his Dark Rangers, and also in that episode, he eventually kidnapped the 5 Power Rangers, and they caught in this force field, and everyone except Tommy was stuck in that force field, so that they're unable to penetrate through it. And especially now that Lord Zedd is basically has the pretty much there was like this crystal that prevents them from penetrating through the barrier. And the Dark Rangers were kind of like the counterpart to the other Rangers. They're in terms of like physical appearance. So I mean, the Dark Rangers thing was just just another lame plot device, so that the Power Rangers can't get access to Tommy, and they can't rescue him in a way. And on top of that, the Dark Rangers, the way they were being suited up was just nothing but just a repainted costume, a repainted prop of the putty suits that you see, and you would think that they would probably use like the Die Ranger suits, but for some reason they never did. Or maybe they didn't import it over from Japan, but I mean, the Dark Rangers, was just a pointless plot device, and a poor excuse just because the Rangers can't escape, because the Dark Rangers just basically stood there. I mean, they didn't like do anything, but it was just some really lame plot device, like I said, and eventually Tommy gets out of the gets out of the dimension that he was trapped with, along with Goldar, and he and he basically sends the same transmission that his future self did during the beginning of part one. But then you get to part two, and Tommy's doing a similar thing with his past self. So eventually the Green Ranger has this final battle, and you don't necessarily see his powers actually depleting, because the Green Ranger losing his powers is kind of off screen, so you don't really see him actually getting his powers drained in any way. But it turned out in hindsight that this would be the last time we get to see Tommy under the Green Ranger suit, and Tommy would be absent for a few episodes. So I mean, with Green No More, I mean, just kind of a solid episode. But there are some problems with it, like I mentioned, like the Dark Rangers, and the lack of the whole, they didn't really serve any sort of purpose. So it was kind of a waste of time there. But Green No More, for the most part, I sort of enjoyed. So there you have it. That, and eventually, the Green Ranger will eventually come back when we get to Super Mega Force. Judging by the photos taken from that was leaked on the internet, and Tommy's like shown wearing his Green Ranger suit. So I mean, it's gonna be interesting to see how that'll go. I mean, granted, the episode hasn't aired yet, but some of the images have been leaked on the internet, so it's kind of a little bit of a sneak preview, if you want to put it that. So that's basically Green No More in a nutshell. And then you have an episode after that, which was Missing Green, which was a Jason-focused episode. And, basically Jason is feeling feeling a sense of regret over the fact that, Jason couldn't retrieve the green candle back in season 1. And as we all discussed, the Green Ranger candle was the main source of the Green Ranger. And now, since the Green Ranger candle is basically withered away, Tommy couldn't morph into the Green Ranger. And, and even though he came back, Zoran had to transfer some of his energy to Tommy in order for him to morph. But, eventually, Zoran it got to the point where Zoran couldn't transfer his powers to Tommy any longer. And, thus, Tommy relieves his duty as a Power Ranger. Or so we thought at the time. And, Jason's kind of feeling disappointed in himself. He sort of blames himself, now that Tommy isn't around. And also along the way, Lord Zedd kidnaps the 4 Rangers, and, he lights up these 4 multicolored candles. And like the green candle, once those candles wither away, the Power Rangers, their energies get drained for good, and thus, the 4 Rangers can't morph. And Jason had to go in and save the day, and which he does, and all is good with the world. So Missing Green, just a very fun episode. We got to see a little more of Jason, and just how his reaction was, despite especially now that Tommy isn't around in terms of like Ranger duty. So yeah, I mean, just a very fun episode. I mean, it's kind of unfortunate that that this would turn out to be the last true focus of Jason. And it wasn't until not long after this episode, the actors that played Austin St. John, the actors that played Jason, Trini, and Zack, they were leaving the series. There was like this fallout backstage where the actors asked their manager for a raise, but since Power Rangers was really hitting it big globally and financially wise, they were kind of asking for a raise, but things weren't working out for them, and as a result, the actors left the series. They all walked out on set, and so they, for the time being, they started hiring these ADR voice actors, and they were, whenever the Power Rangers morph, they had to go to like the ADR studio and do like voiceovers, since the Power Rangers, when they're in morphed form, they have to utilize stunt actors. So they normally have to go to the ADR studio to do, to provide voiceovers. And the actors that played Trini, Jason, and Zack all left, and then they were replaced with voice actors that hardly ever sounded like them. And there was just, I don't know, it was just really ridiculous back then. You could obviously tell that it wasn't their voices. I mean, if you hear like the voiceover for Trini, she had like this sort of like British Australian accent, and you could obviously tell that was certainly not Tweety Train's voice because she didn't even have an accent. Um, so, and also they had to like recycle footage from previous episodes when those actors were still around, and they had to, like I said, recycle the episodes from past, from season one or so forth. Um, so yeah, I mean, the last episode they shot, I believe, was Opposites Attract, and then they left eventually. Um, and before I get to the ninja encounter, there's also an episode called White Light, and in the two-part miniseries, Lord Zedd unleashes the Scarlet Sentinel, would consist of like these two split villains like AC and DC. And yes, this is kind of like a nod to the rock band that was popular, and there still are today. But AC and DC are based off the rock band, and eventually the Power Rangers were gonna contact Zordon, but Zordon Alpha also like disappear, and no one knows whatever happened to them. When they were in the command center, and while the rest of the Power Rangers except Billy were fighting against the Scarlet Sentinel, Billy snuck in this air vent and he eavesdropped, and he was overhearing that Zordon Alpha were creating a new Power Ranger. And so, he informs the Rangers about the news, and, eventually in part two, we get to see the identity of the White Ranger, and which it turns out that Tommy was involved in the project as well. So, Tommy reveals his identity as the White Ranger, Kimberly faints, and, everyone's in shock and awe. So then Zordon announced Tommy that he was like gonna be the leader of the team, and eventually he has his first fight against the Scarlet Sentinel, and he also gets the Tiger Megazord, and he uses it to destroy the Scarlet Sentinel. So basically, Tommy's back, and this time he's the White Ranger. There isn't any sort of shenanigans that prevent Tommy from even being a Power Ranger. So Tommy's back full time. He's back for good, and for the next couple years to come. So that's really White Light. But it was, like I said, this is really a very good episode. This was sort of the beginning of the end in a way, because like I said, the actors that played Jason, Trini, and Zack were preparing to leave the series, and it was announced, and they were doing voiceovers at the last moment where Zordon announced Tommy that he was going to be the leader, although technically he originally wasn't going to be the leader. But Jason, he was still, there were still some kind of like situations where Jason was still leading the team, but like once Jason left the series, Tommy steps in and becomes the leader, like officially. But I guess you could say Tommy was still kind of going through the Green Ranger sort of phase. But eventually, White Light, just a very solid episode, but just kind of like the unofficial leadership role that Tommy would eventually get. But like I said, wouldn't happen until Jason leaves the series, and that's like I said, White Light, just a good episode. So there you have it. That. And then we get to a multi-parter, the Ninja Encounter, where we get to be introduced with 3 new characters. You have Rocky, Adam, and Aisha. Now I have really vague memories with the Ninja Encounter. I do remember like the beginning of the episode where like there was this random baby sitting on a stroller, and it was running by itself, and the Power Rangers had to save the baby. And eventually Tommy, Kimberly, and Billy meet up with the 3 new characters. And there was also supposed to be like a martial arts competition that I think involves Rocky and Aisha. And then like around like towards the end of the miniseries, Tommy, Kimberly, and Billy revealed their identities to Rocky, Adam, Aisha. There was like some kind of like accident that led to them, that led to the Rocky and Aisha. They were like sort of suspicious that that they may recognize who the Power Rangers were, and eventually Tommy, Kimberly, and Billy unveiled their identities. And after that, there was like this little oath by Zordon, since the 3 new characters knew who most of their identities were, and they were doing this oath, and that they agreed that they wouldn't reveal their identities to anyone else, whether it be their parents or friends and so forth. So that was basically the Ninja Counter. So I apologize I didn't really go into detail with the Ninja Encounter like I did with the other episodes, but it was really, all I could say is this is the really start of the slow transition from the old guards being replaced by the new guards, and this is Jason, Trini, and Zack were slowly getting phased out, and even though the actors left, they were still around, but you don't really see them like interact with the 3 new characters. So they had to like use like certain stunt actors, or they had to like pan away from them, and they were doing what they can to kind of prevent us from thinking that Jason, Trini, and Zack weren't around anymore. So they had to kind of improvise in a way, and eventually you get to the Power Transfer, which was this 2-part miniseries, and in the 2-part miniseries, Jason, Trini, and Zack passed. Yes, they passed their powers over to Rocky, Adam, Aisha, but before that, they were invited to join this peace conference, which was located in Switzerland. And since Switzerland and California were very far away from one another, this kind of leads to Jason, Trini, and Zack giving up their duties as Power Rangers, and thus they did this little power transfer where Tommy races up his sword of light, and Jason, Trini, and Zack pass over their powers to Rocky, and Aisha, and they become the Red, Black, and Yellow Rangers respectively. And so after that, Jason, Trini, and Zack say their farewells, and they both get teleported to Switzerland, or at least teleport somewhere where they prepare to leave California. So that was basically the power transfer in a nutshell. It was really sort of an end of an era. It was really a shame to see the characters leave. There was just a lot of BS going on even before then. Like Jason, Trini, and Zack would always get kidnapped, and we all know Jason is usually the one of the toughest Power Rangers of the team, and to see him get his ass whipped a lot, you could really tell. They just were kind of giving up on him, and they were just doing whatever they can to sort of write them off, and basically they eventually do that. So it's very unfortunate that they left, and eventually Jason would come back, in Zeo and the Turbo movie, as well as Forever Red. And sadly, Zack and Trini won't be seen on Power Rangers ever again. And it's kind of really a shame that they left. And the actress played Tweet Train also passed away, so rest in peace to her. Um, so I mean, the power transfer, just a good episode, but just like I said, it's the end of an era. But life goes on. And then you had a couple one-off episodes, a couple standalones. Adam had a few focused episodes. Adam had like an episode where he asked the girl on a date, and it turns out that the girl that Adam asked on the date was Scorpina in disguise. And Scorpina hadn't been seen in season 2 a whole lot since Rita left. I mean, she appeared like in the background for a little bit, and then she kind of fizzled out. Eventually, she would come back, and it would turn out to be the last time we ever get to see her. And eventually, Adam can, Scorpina, we don't see her again after this episode, and Adam, basically had to find another person to go on a date. So I mean, just the generic teenage drama sort of episode, but I mean, it wasn't bad or anything, but just your regular Power Ranger episode. And then he had another episode with the Mirror of Regret, where like Adam was caught in this battle with the Putties and Goldar, and he was holding this mirror where there was like this sort of spell where Adam was starting to have starting to get some self-confidence problems, and it kind of haunts his childhood again, since when he was a kid he was always getting picked on and getting his ass kicked, but eventually Adam fights off of it. So that was really Mirror of Regret. So I mean, out of all the 3 Power Rangers, the replacement Rangers, Adam had a I sort of enjoyed his episodes. I do think his character can be a little overrated. I do think it might be because the actor that played Adam, Johnny Young Bosch, went on to have a successful acting career, as an anime voice actor, and his role as Ichigo in the English dub version of Bleach. But I'm not knocking him off. I mean, Johnny Young Bosch, he seems to be a pretty chill guy. But I do think the Power Rangers fandom tend to overrate Adam for the wrong reasons, or maybe not the wrong reasons necessarily. Take that back, but just I think he just gets too much praise than he gets. But he was just Adam, he was just this shy guy that was very quiet, and but he was just seemed to be a pretty flat character. But a lot of the earlier Power Rangers were pretty flat, but this is before the time when this is before Power Rangers started to become more story driven, so they were still kind of emphasizing on the whole Monster of the Day episodes. So I mean, that's my Morphin Power Rangers for you. So Mirror of Regret, just a pretty good episode. No problems with that. So that's basically Adam's focused episodes. And then you have like Rocky's episode, Rocky's Just Wants to Have Fun, where Rocky was he was sort of addicted to this pachinko game that he was playing, because Lord Zedd put a spell on him where he just couldn't help but keep playing the pachinko head game. And this kind of has Billy and Aisha very confused, and they just weren't sure what was going on with Rocky, just acting like a little kid. And eventually, even in morphed form, there was like this infamous internet meme where Rocky was going back and forth and he was dancing around, and the Power Rangers had this sort of weird reaction to them. You don't really see them like have a facial reaction, because they were all morphed, but it turns out to be such an internet meme. But it was just a really terrible episode. But eventually, Rocky, the spell gets repelled from Rocky. He's back to his normal self, and Rocky learns his lesson that work is important before play, or work comes first before play. Excuse me. So that was basically Rocky just wants to have fun. Just I didn't really enjoy that episode. I mean, it just made Rocky look like an idiot. I mean, I don't think he really deserves the hate that he gets. I think he sort of like he just kind of gets the short end of the stick, in terms of focused episodes. But it was just, I can't imagine how Jason would have been like if he was still around. But it's like I said, just a very terrible episode, and I don't recommend anyone watching it. But if you want to, that's fine, and you enjoy it, that's cool to you. More power to you. But personally, for me, I didn't enjoy it. So there you have it with Rocky, and then you also have an Aisha focus episode. She didn't really have a whole lot, but there was like one episode. And this episode kind of emphasizes on fire safety, and where like Aisha was holding, this sort of, she was kind of really getting caught up with this whole, save the environment, sort of like Trini usually do, but she's like trying so hard to persuade others to like do the right thing, unlike Trini, who's just very encouraging. But Aisha kind of gets caught up with this whole thing, and the Power Rangers are kind of really feeling a bit. They're kind of feeling a bit. I'm looking for that word, but eventually Aisha learns her lesson, and the Power Rangers who were kind of acting all concerned about Aisha, eventually. Aisha learns her lesson, and the Power Rangers forgive her, and that was basically that episode. So I mean, so Aisha, like I said, didn't really have a much focused episodes. So I mean, it was really a hard time to kind of get us used to the replacement Rangers, and Power Rangers was still pretty hot at the time, in terms of popularity, and merchandise sales were still selling well, despite the cast changes. But it was just a really rough transition. So it was kind of something that I think a lot of viewers had yet to get used to, and personally for myself. But I mean, it is what it is. So I mean, I'm not gonna like go on a rampage or anything necessarily. And then we get to a couple multi-part episodes. Rangers Back in Time, when the Power Rangers are reverted to kids, and Lord Zedd unleashes this sort of rock of time, and which causes the Earth's rotation to revert back, and like reverting the kids, and like I said, reverting everyone back to their youth. And also the Power Rangers can't morph, and they don't really have any memories of them being Power Rangers. So that was kind of like the whole plot of the series. So eventually Lord Zedd unleashes this camera monster, and he takes a picture at the Power Rangers, and they're also stuck in the picture, and they can't get out. They're frozen, and that's really how part one ended. And then part two came when like Alpha had to go in and get the rescue the Power Rangers, get them out of the picture, get out of the photo, and eventually Alpha uses this sort of device that causes the Power Rangers to revert to their normal selves again, their teenage forms, and eventually the Power Rangers fight back, and to my knowledge, I think this was around the time they introduced the power cannon, which was like this. The Power Rangers had to insert insert these multicolored orbs, which represent the Ranger color that they're in. Like red charge, white charge, pink charge, black charge, blue charge, yellow charge. So that was basically what the power cannon So it was kind of one of their most powerful team up weapons, and I think that kind of replaced the Power Blaster from season one. So I mean, they don't really use the power cannon a whole lot, so maybe that's why it gets kind of forgotten. Um, and they also had like the whole purpose of jetting, which has the Power Rangers. It's sort of like teleportation, but they're actually like flying all across the Earth. But that was another thing that they didn't use for very long. So just a couple of power, a couple of power enhancements that weren't really used very often. So that was basically Rangers Back in Time. And then you have another multi-parter after that, which was The Wedding. In this three-parter, Rita returns. She's freed from the dumpster that she was trapped in, and she creates this. And I can't even speak. But Rita gives Zedd this sort of love potion, but what instead, Lord Zedd was under this sort of meditation, and Finster creates the love potion that Rita asked him to make, and so Rita pours the love potion over to Zedd, and which causes Lord Zedd to fall in love with Rita, and thus Lord Zedd starts to really get neutered as a result, and when I meant neutered, Lord Zedd started to lose that whole cold, calculated voice that he used to have, just this sort of mindset, so to speak. And, Lord Zedd became like the generic comic relief that's always cracking up jokes. So, I mean, yeah, this was really pretty much the the nail in the coffin for Lord Zedd. And when he first showed up, he was just this very creepy villain that you don't want to mess with. And then by the time you get to the wedding, Lord Zedd started becoming just pretty much another generic villain that that's very goofy and comical, and I just personally wasn't really fond of that. But I mean, eventually, Zedd and Rita would eventually get along, and they work together to triumph over the Power Rangers. But that won't happen until like next season. But some people might disagree and think Lord Zedd ended up getting better with Rita eventually. But I still kind of hold to my opinion that Zedd was better as working alone before Rita and all those shenanigans came. But that was really the whole plot of the episode. And the Power Rangers eventually go to Australia, and yes, this was really around the time when the Power Rangers was going to get filmed in time for the movie. So it was shot in Sydney, Australia. So I guess they went to Australia in order to finish the project. So eventually, I think they kind of hint, just kind of showing some signs that they were actually trying to finish the movie. And then also the Power Rangers get caught in this, they get trapped in this haunted mansion, and what happens is like Alpha, one of Zedd's villains hijack the command center, and they insert this sort of disc on Alpha, and he's starting to act all crazy, and he pretty much shuts down the transmission of Zordon, so they won't contact him. And Alpha was just going all crazy, and the Power Rangers had a hard time finding their way around in the mansion. So and they also had to meet up with these old villains that had to fight, but unfortunately they couldn't use their weapons, and it kind of gives them a hard time. There was like a little error in that episode. Even though the Power Rangers couldn't use their signature weapons, Tommy still had his Saba sword, and that just seemed like just a funny error there. But it's just, I don't know. I can't really elaborate as much, but there was like the slight error where like Tommy still had his Saba sword while the other Rangers' signature weapons were all gone. But just I don't know. It's kind of hilarious there. Just a hilarious error. Um, but that was really all that happened with the wedding. Eventually, the Power Rangers get out of the haunted mansion. It took them like 2-3 tries, and eventually, they get back to command center, and they eject the disc that was making Alpha corrupt in a way. So eventually, the Power Rangers get their revenge and pretty much save the day as usual. Um, so that was basically the wedding in a nutshell. And then I think another multi-parter after this was Return of the Green Ranger. Um, this is probably one of my favorite episodes. What happens is that Lord Zedd creates the Wizard of Deception, or at least Lord Zedd and Rita together. They both create the Wizard of Deception, and the wizard chops off some of Tommy's hair, and thus creates another Tommy clone. But unlike the other Tommy, who had like the White Ranger suit, Tommy had the ability to morph into the Green Ranger again, with the Dragon coin as opposed to the Tiger coin. And eventually, there was the fake Tommy sets up a trap for the Power Rangers when they sent them back to the colonial age. And while all that was going on, the real Tommy had to fight against the fake Tommy. The Green Ranger, the White Ranger going at it. So it was actually pretty enjoyable episode. So I mean, it was just for its time, it was just a really great way to see these guys go at it. I mean, who wouldn't want to see Green versus White Ranger? But this is a really nice treat of an episode. And then also like while the other Power Rangers were going, they're just trying to find their way around in the colonial age. But I mean, California back then wasn't really one of the 13 colonies technically. I mean, California wasn't a state until like the 1800s. But eventually, I mean, it was just kind of a weird episode. I mean, then again, it's Power Rangers, so most of their, they just kind of like to screw around with history. But like I said, California wasn't one of the 13 colonies. I mean, the 13 colonies were only on the East Coast, but California. I mean, I don't know. It's just a lot, just a lot of history errors there. And you also have like Adam falling for this blonde girl that he had sort of had a crush on. So that was actually just a nice toss there. Just nice little subplot going there. But but the main focus was of course the Green versus the White Ranger saga, and eventually the Power Rangers get out of the colonial age, but before that, the White Ranger, the Green Ranger, all team up together. The White Ranger convinced the Green Ranger that he wasn't that he wasn't the bad guy, and that this was all a ruse. So eventually, they destroy the Wizard of Deception, and they go back in time to get the other Power Rangers, and try to get them back to their own time. So eventually, the fake Tommy, the one with the Green Ranger, stays in the colonial age, while the other Power Rangers and the real Tommy return back to their time. And basically, the episode ends with Adam and this random blonde girl bumping into each other, and it actually turns out to be the same actress that was portraying the girl that was from the colonial age. So that was basically how the episode ends. So like I said, Return of the Green Ranger, a very fun, action-packed episode. I mean, from this point on, for the rest of season 2, you're just gonna see a lot of these multi-parter episodes, and there's just really a shitload of them in season 2, and I guess even in season 3 when we get to that. But with season 2, there was just a ton of them, and it just seems like forever. Like they tend to drag on certain storylines, longer than they should. So I think that's probably one of my few complaints I had with season two. Was the constant multi-parters. They just most of them just threw me off. I mean, although there are some multi-parters that I enjoyed, but like the Green Ranger one and the Mutiny and White Light. But then you had like other multi-parters that probably were more worthy as being standalones. And speaking of that, and this another example of a filler multi-parter is Storybook Rangers. And the Storybook Rangers in that episode, Kimberly, Rocky, and Tommy are trapped in this story that Kimberly used to read when she was a little girl, and eventually they have to find their way out there by completing the story the way it should. But then Zedd orders Goldar and his minions to invade the story and try to alter it in a way where the Power Rangers can't get out of it, and as a result, the Power Rangers had to like I can't remember what they had to do, but they had to give them the elves like these Christmas gifts, and yeah. So I mean, it was sort of like a I think it was shot around like Thanksgiving. I mean, there was like a segment with Bulk and Skull where they were having like this sort of turkey, some sort of Thanksgiving thing going on. And you also have like the old. They had Zedd and Rita created this monster named Turkey Jerk. So I'm not sure if this episode was actually supposed to be meant for Thanksgiving, but I mean, Power Rangers, they tend to celebrate, do like these holiday theme episodes, like the Christmas ones, during the winter time. But other than that, and also you have the Halloween episodes too. But besides that, Power Rangers don't do any other holiday episodes. But it's not really a holiday episode necessarily. But it almost felt like this was shot around the time during like Christmas season. But I don't know. But they shot, and this episode originally aired around May. So Storybook Rangers, just a crappy filler multi-parter episode. I don't recommend you watching it. So eventually, the Power Rangers get out of the story and destroy the Turkey Jerk, and that was basically Storybook Rangers there. And then you have one last other multi-parter episode, Wild West Rangers. Kimberly gets sucked in this time hole, and she travels back in time to the 1880s, and she meets up with the other Power Rangers ancestors and the White Stranger, who's actually the White Ranger, but White Stranger was the ancestor also of Tommy. And eventually Goldar and his minions go back in time also and attack the Old West. And so Kimberly pretty much resorts to go to Zordon, the command center, and she had to. She was kind of wondering what was going on and how to get out of her own, how to get back to her time, and so she had to give the Power Rangers ancestors these power coins, like the ones that the regular Power Rangers have, but we're talking about back in time, 1880s, before the Power Rangers characters existed. So they had to give them to their ancestors, and there was like this funny line where Zordon said something, where like Kimberly was asking, about the pink power coin, because Kimberly could still morph even when she's back in time. She had her own power coin, and she had it with her, and then there was like another pink power coin, and then Zordon was like saying something like, "What if she used it at the same time?" And then like Zordon answered, "Too much pink power is dangerous," or like too much pink energy is dangerous. She said, he said something like that, and it had me cracking up laughing. Just it just kind of caught me off guard there. So Zordon said something about too much pink energy is dangerous, and So Kimberly can't use two power coins at the same time, otherwise she'll go in this power overload and potentially die. And eventually Kimberly talks to the other Rangers' ancestors about their Ranger about the Ranger coins, and she explains everything to them. And eventually Kimberly leads the team, and they fight off against Goldar and the Putties, and eventually Kimberly goes back to her own time, and that's basically Wild West Rangers. Um, I mean, they did a lot of traveling episodes if you think about it. Return of the Green Ranger, Rangers Back in Time, and Wild West Rangers. So and also Return of the Green Ranger as well. Um, but they did a lot of time traveling. Like I said, I guess more time traveling than Power Rangers Time Force ever did. But I mean, but Wild West Rangers, for what it was still a pretty enjoyable episode. No complaints really. It's kind of cool just to see Kimberly leading the team, and I just wish we got to see more of that. But so that was basically Wild West Rangers. And then you have like the last episode, Blue Ranger Gone Bad, where like Lord Zedd creates this. Actually, Billy creates this whole like sort of statue, and then like during like an art class, and then Lord Zedd turns Billy's project into a clone of himself, and Billy, the real Billy gets kidnapped and taken to this dark dimension, while the fake Billy, was starting to act all rude and crude. And there was like an attempt where like the fake Billy asked the Power Rangers to, he recommended the Power Rangers to hand over their Dino coins, and what they didn't realize was the fake Billy was doing this just so that they could get the Dino coins over to Zedd and his minions, as well as Zedd and Rita's minions, excuse me. So eventually, the real Billy goes back, and they have a little just a little fight going on, and eventually we get to see the Blue Ranger and the two Blue Rangers going at it, basically what I'm saying. And so eventually the fake Billy gets destroyed, and Billy starts to have Billy was asking Violet out on a date, and Billy had like this sort of crush on her. So basically Billy apologizes for his rudeness, and eventually they hook up. But like many other recurring supporting characters, Violet was just a one-off episode, so you don't really see her again. So that's really Blue Ranger Gone Bad. Just another Power Ranger episode that they kind of recycled sort of the same ideas, like good Power Ranger versus bad Power Ranger, clone versus clone. I mean, they were just basically like recycling like a bunch of episodes, with the similar sort of concept, just in a different situation, different environment. So that's basically how season 2 ends. So overall, Power Rangers season 2, just a very average season. It started off pretty good in the beginning, with the Green Ranger story arc, and the first 13 episodes, and then the actors that played Jason, Trini, and Zack left the series midway through, and this is where Rocky, Adam, Aisha come aboard and replace those three. And then then you had like these constant multi-parters that were drawn out longer than they should. So Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, just season 2, just a very average season. I mean, it started off pretty well, and then it just kind of slowly went downhill by the end of season 2. And thus, that's basically it for this video. What are your thoughts on the season? What did you like? What did you not like about it? Stay tuned for season 3. Hopefully I can hopefully I can upload it in time for the official 20th anniversary, which is the 28th of August. So I'll probably upload the season 3 video in 2 days. Um, stick around for that. And till next time, this is the Gold Standard 00924 signing out.